In today's episode of Real Talk, Come Follow Me, we'll talk about the strength and loyalty of Ruth.
And we talk about infertility and sometimes the rude things people say, even at church. All that and a lot more on this week's episode.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Real Talk, Come Follow Me. We are happy you joined us today to dive into 1 Samuel 1 through 3. Amazing stories.
And the book of Ruth.
Oh yeah, and Ruth. Oh my goodness, I forgot. I didn't write that on my paper.
That's okay.
Awesome.
It's right here, but it's kind of hidden.
Oh, sorry. Oh, it is. It's not even hidden. That's embarrassing.
No, it's real on Real Talk.
Well, start us off today. I know you've got some awesome stuff to get us going.
Ruth and Naomi.
I love it so much.
Shish.
The story of Ruth is so amazing.
I would have done all of this season just to talk about these women this week. The book of Ruth, I think, is so tender, right? It's conversion, it's courage, it's refugee story, it's grief, it's loyalty, it's faithfulness, it's everything. And
it's just
women.
A wonderful story. Yeah. Full of lots of strong women.
Yes. And I love, I didn't even put the right reference here, so I'm not even sure who said it in the Ensign from 2002. Sorry for whoever wrote Models to Follow, but it was about the womanhood of Ruth and how she was so grief-stricken, and her mother-in-law Naomi, and they, here they've lost everything, and yet they choose to stay together. And I love these verses of scripture in Ruth 1:16, right? I will go where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. And Ruth's actions demonstrated the sincerity of her word. Like, she was a woman of action. It wasn't just, I'm going to say, this is where my faith and loyalty is. I'm going to do that.
She showed it.
Yeah. So just a quick little, I love a good overview. Ruth 1 is, we pick up where Naomi and her family moved to Moab, where her husband dies and her sons marry Moabite women. Yeah. And after Naomi's sons die, Naomi moves back to Bethlehem, and one of her daughter-in-laws, Ruth, chooses to go with her. Ruth 2 talks about how Ruth works to support Naomi, and they start the gleaning in the fields job where they meet Boaz. And then Ruth 3 is where Ruth and Boaz, there's a responsibility there because there is a family connection with Naomi.
Laws.
Right. Yeah. And then Ruth 4, that chapter discusses and shows how Boaz really does take responsibility, marries Ruth, and they have a son. If we just read this, it would be a cool story of compensatory gifts, of loss, of grief, of having opportunities to choose to stay connected when maybe grief could tear us apart. But beyond that, what I love about this story is this is an example of how compensatory God can be, because from that son, within a few generations, we get the birth of the Savior. Yeah. And I wonder if these women, when they were so grief sick and they were struggling on probably every level, and you're going to share some thoughts that I think are so important within context of this relationship, but how was God able to witness to them? I promise you, it feels like everything has been lost, and really everything had been.
Right. In the moment, everything had been lost.
And here's this really lame job of picking up whatever's left in the field. Right. And I promise you, if you keep showing up, there's a really cool blessing coming. Not only is there a marriage and a baby, but Jesus is going to come through this line. And I think how often I find myself in the fields, picking up the scraps, wondering if my offering is going to amount to anything. And I really do take a lot of strength from Ruth and Naomi that we have a compensatory God that is watching us in whatever space we're in. And sometimes the miracle doesn't show up for a few generations. Right. And that can be hard.
It can be hard.
Yeah.
But it happens every time.
Right.
My wife and I are just coming out of a season. I won't go into too many details, but just a season of just stress and doubt and anxiety and fearing for the future. But you just know if you keep plodding forward, right? I mean, the blessings come. You just stay connected to the Savior and He gets you through. And that's been our experience over and over.
Same for me. I mean, I've shared before in books and here that when God was very clear that I was to leave this dream job of managing a magazine, I jump forward and see there was a lot of years in the middle of that, right?
Yeah.
Where it was walk away from this. And we're really going to see that with Ruth and Naomi. They were walking away and lost a lot. And then jump forward to sit with you and do this show and share messages that I thought it was pretty cool to do it in the version I was doing it.
Yeah.
But God is a compensatory God.
Yeah.
But there's the gap years that we have to pull these stories up to help us get through them, right?
Right. And sometimes we gloss over those, but sometimes that's that's where the growth really happens. Well, I really love something here in this story of Ruth and Naomi and the other daughter-in-law, Orpah. I'm assuming, I went back and I need to maybe do a more careful reading, but I'm assuming both Ruth and Orpah officially converted in order to join the family when Naomi and her husband and her sons moved to Moab. And so here, when Ruth's husband died and Orpah's husband died, Naomi's sons, here, now, to think of Ruth's perspective, the very thing that brought her into the church, these new familial ties through marriage, they're all gone. And she's just left with her mother-in-law. I just want you to think about that. Like, would I stay? That was my thought. My thought was, not would I stay if it was only me and my mother-in-law left. That's not what I mean. What I mean is...
I'm just going to say, like, hanging out with your mother-in-law, I'm not saying there's not amazing mother-in-laws out there, but...
Right. I have the best one, by the way.
Right. Just the context of that, like you said, is she's not even in her hometown anymore.
Right.
So her whole why, if it was that...
So I would just invite our audience to think about this. What if you had lost all familial ties to the church, whether through some tragic means or through just them leaving the church, choosing to leave the church.
Which is happening a lot.
Yeah. What if it was just you? And I know that for some people, this is their reality right now.
Yeah. This is actually real life.
This is not a reality for me, though. It made me think. So if this is not your reality, I would invite you to think about that. What is your why to stay in the church when all familial ties are gone? And when Naomi looks to her daughters-in-law and she says, "I'm so sorry for you two. I don't have any more sons for you. They're gone." So just
because that was the tradition.
That was it, right? Like go back to your gods. Go back to your people, right? Orpah, who no doubt loved her mother-in-law and was a wonderful woman, cried and hugged her and said, "I love you," and she went back. But Ruth, interestingly, you mentioned this verse, and I think it's worth repeating in verse 16 of Ruth 1. She says, "Entreat me not to leave thee." So she loves Naomi, obviously. "Or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God shall be my God." And so it's made me start thinking about the difference between two categories: social conversion to the church and spiritual conversion. I've known both types of people. People who are brought into the church through a more social angle and attraction to the sociality, the support network, which can be very attractive and very helpful.
The community.
And strengthening, But I've also witnessed that sometimes if that goes away.
Or becomes tense.
Right. Then all of a sudden,
there's no scaffolding.
there's nothing to kind of keep them in the church.
We've talked about a few weeks ago, you are really a great example to me of being really vertically connected and not be so socially dependent. Yeah. And I think what a great insight of Ruth wrestling with that.
And so maybe a good talking point just for our audience as you look this week, what's my why? Why am I in the church? Am I a social convert? Am I a spiritual convert? What if all my social perks to being in the church were gone? What would be my why to stick around?
Man, and I've asked myself those questions of do you ever do this where you're thinking worst case scenario? And I've really sat with where is my why? If everyone in my immediate family, my closest friends, my extended family all said, "Hey, what you believe is not what I believe." And I mean, death is hard, but what if like many of our viewers and in our own families, they're still alive and they walk away? Where am I at? And it's a little litmus test for me on a regular basis where I'm like, am I staying vertically converted.
Well, and if nothing else, it can give us an appreciation and an understanding for that struggle in others
Right.
who have to go through this reality. But secondly, maybe just boost our love and admiration of Ruth,
Right.
who clearly was just like, well, look, I love you, but I'm so vertically connected. And that speaking of vertically connected, powerful women, what do you think we should jump to?
Yeah,
Hannah.
Hannah. I love Hannah, and I think anyone that has dealt with infertility, I think Hannah is one of those sacred sisters to help create comfort and connection. 1 Samuel 1, verses 2. And he had 2 wives, and the name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was, I'm not going to say it.
On, you try
that
every
other
other
one,
time.
starting with P. But Hannah had no children. She had children, Hannah didn't. We've seen this, Abraham. We've seen, this is the theme. Like,
it's a really common story, it turns out.
I feel like God is like very mindful of those dealing with infertility. And then you jump to verse 7. And I just want to share this because I write about it in a booklet I wrote called Mother to Mother. Hopefully we can get that in the show notes. But I had a really sacred experience writing about Hannah and really feeling her spirit. Because in verse 7 it says, and as he did so year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her, therefore she wept and did not eat. So in this situation, the high priest, which we can just call the bishop, sees her and she's weeping because year after year, she's fasted, prayed. Like my own infertility journey, it was like 7 years of like all the doctor's appointments, all the fasting. People would say the rudest things like, oh, so you're just not into kids, or you guys aren't like following the prophet, or you're just not praying enough. And then we would say,
so hurtful.
It is so hurtful. And we tried to make jokes to kind of get through some of those awkward conversation moments where we would say things like, we're into money and kids are expensive. We really want.
Wow, you just stuck it to them.
We just like full send on that. and it would like kind of neutralize it. But in this situation, Hannah has this priesthood leader who is like, are you drunk? Because in verse 10 it says, and she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept and sore. Verse 13, and now Hannah, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. I've had those prayers where it's like, I don't even have words for this. And therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. Verse 13, the high priest is seeing her cry, and she's fasting, and she's doing all the things. She's not having the baby. And then verse 14, this is what she said. Instead of getting offended, and Eli said unto her, how long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. At this moment, I'm thinking Hannah could have just been like, that's it, dude.
Totally false accusation.
Yeah.
Didn't take time to try to understand the situation.
My husband's
Put his
other
foot
wife
in his
has
mouth.
kids.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm dealing with on the regular? Like if I go to one more baby shower, I'm going to lose my living
This is a
mind.
reality for many people too. So let's
Very
just acknowledge
current.
that.
Very current.
Yeah. When was the last time something like this happened to you in church? We could learn from Hannah's faithful response here.
And instead of taking those insensitive comments and removing herself, she allows, this is what I wrote about and had the insight, she allowed her priesthood leader to hear from her perspective. Like they counseled in my mind together. Yeah. And she was like, I'm not drunk. I'm really struggling. Infertility has gone on way too long. And he blesses her. And I don't know how long it takes. Like the wait, it's not clear. But when we jump down to verse 27, she is now a mother. Yeah. And she is blessed in a way that I think sometimes when I get offended, I remove myself from the blessing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this wasn't offensive. And I'm not saying we don't have real reason to be offended every Sunday in our own wards or in our own homes. But I love that Hannah shows me her humility and she keeps showing up and she allows the blessing to happen. And therefore, in verse 28, right, she's promised to give the Lord this baby that she has prayed and fasted for.
Which is crazy, man. You know, that level of sacrifice and commitment.
Right? Like the analogy of the Savior. I mean, there's so many connections we could have. I'm thinking of missionary mamas and military mamas that are like, okay, here's my baby.
Boy, don't get my wife started on this. She could cry on the spot when we talk about the sacrifice required.
You've got two missionary boys out right now.
Yes. And last Mother's Day, they both chimed in. We had them both on the screen, one from Italy, one from California. My other son, who's home, who is married now, he was there. And then my last son, who has his mission call in right now, his mission papers in.
Oh, he does?
He has his papers in.
Breaking news. I didn't know about the Fossum
No
news.
call yet, but his papers are in. And so she just mentioned again in that call just how hard it is for her to be away from her boys. And I could get emotional about that too. It's not
I'm
just,
away
not,
from my
not,
boy
not just
too.
mamas who feel
Yeah.
emotional about that, but
Yeah.
yeah, we're glad that they're part of a good work, but it's hard to
Yeah.
say goodbye to them and see them leave for so long.
It really is. And I feel like I'm talking too much, but I just want to pick up this point.
Please,
She
continue.
goes on to have children. She has family and children that she doesn't send off to live with the prophet and be given to the Lord in such a bold way. But I think one of the most tender verses of scripture is in 1 Samuel 2:19.
Yes.
Every year, it says, moreover, his mother made him a little coat and brought it up to him from year to year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. I don't even know, like, if there is a question if God is mindful of mama's hearts, that this verse survived all the translations,
Right.
that I'm not a seamstress, but the idea that she was like making a little coat for her boy, and once a year she got to go visit him. I think of so many moms and dads, but what mothering looks like or what parenting looks like when your children are away from you. I'm entering that phase where my baby's about to leave, and so all the kids, the two, are gone. And I have to think about from Moses's mom who put her baby in a basket to Hannah who's like, how about I just make a coat every year? To parenting adult children's where you don't have that access. Like, I feel like God is so mindful of what we can do as parents.
Yeah.
And my sweet mother-in-law is a great seamstress, so she really appreciates these references. She made my husband's suits for his mission, and they survived years after his mission because
so
that's her
cool.
gift. And so
What a tribute.
I just think what a tender way God is like signaling, like, I see what you can do as a mom, and here she's gone through all this infertility. She gives up her boy and she takes him a coat every year. It's just so tender. I love it. Thanks for letting me go on and on about
thank you. That's beautiful.
sweet Hannah.
That's a powerful theme of sacrifice, and one that carries with it so many blessings. I want to pick up with Samuel.
He's now living with Eli.
He's now a child living with Eli there, serving in the temple. And in Samuel chapter 3, 1 Samuel 3, verse 1, it says, the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli. And the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. And to me, that's an important detail. There seems to be, this is one of those prophesied famines of the word that happened in the scriptures. No open vision. But we know what happened. 1 Samuel 3, 10 and 11, the Lord came, right? And he stands there before Samuel and he calls Samuel. And Samuel's been tutored to know what to say now by Eli, tutored to say, God, here, I'm here, right? So God calls him and he says, Lord, I'm here. What I'm listening. What do you want me to do? This little boy all by himself at the tabernacle has this miraculous manifestation, vision of God. And God says, I'm going to do something with you, buddy. I'm going to make you a prophet. Well, the next day, Samuel he's reluctant to tell Eli. Now think about this. He's a little boy all by himself who had this experience. Eli's going to come and he's going to say, hey, what happened? Oh, I'm just a little boy, but God said I'm going to be the next prophet. And, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Here's an important detail. My mission president told me this, and I never forgot it. He noticed in verse 20 that it says, once Samuel shared this with Eli, Eli said, okay. And he told everybody, and it says, verse 20, all Israel from Dan even to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. Now, Dan is the farthest sort of northern border of the kingdom, and Beersheba is the farthest southern. So in other words, everybody, at the word of this boy, who was all by himself when this manifestation occurred, everyone fell in line. It wasn't about how many people had witnessed it. It was about receiving the witness of the Spirit that God had truly visited this boy. Now, I bring this up maybe for obvious reasons, but a common attack against Joseph Smith is that, oh, why would God do such a thing? Appear to some random kid in the woods in New York and expect the rest of us to believe. And I go, well, yeah, it's happened before. And yeah, the people then were also expected to get a witness through the Spirit that it happened, just like we are today, because no one witnessed it back then. But everybody back then apparently had enough faith to go to the Lord and receive that witness. And they did. And Samuel became the next prophet. And so I'd like to, if it's all right, finish today with a brief story.
Yeah.
I've mentioned many times on this show how I had a great awakening at 18 years old. And I had a series of events that led to where I am today and is still leading me on this path of growth and coming to God. But I remember one of the things I did when I moved out here to Utah after I graduated high school, my goal was, I knew I had to read the Book of Mormon. I had not read the Book of Mormon. And I knew I had to read the Book of Mormon and ask God and find out for myself whether the Book of Mormon and the Joseph Smith story and experience was true, was if God was at the origin of it. And I made up my mind that if I didn't receive that witness, I was out.
Because that was going to be the core.
That was it. Yeah. I was like, if that's not true, then I believed in God. I knew he would speak to me. I really had a lot of faith in that. But I genuinely was open to any answer he was going to give me about the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith. Genuinely open to yes or no.
Your born again experience.
Yeah. And so I read the book. I made a commitment. I would read every word on every page. That was my commitment. It took me months. I would take it to work with me. When I had time, I would read verses during lunch. And then the night, after a couple months, the night where I finished it, something happened that has become sort of a foundational experience in my life. I read Moroni chapter 10, and I'm reading, and I still hadn't had any sort of what I would call a manifestation.
So you read the whole thing, all the words.
Whole thing, every word. And I see the last page coming. I'm on the left page, and I see the right page where my copy ended, page 531. And I'm like, I see the end there, and I haven't received anything. So I paused, and I was like, God, if you wanted to say something, that would be a good time.
We're about to be there.
Because remember my commitment. I need something more than a warm fuzzy here. I need an experience that's going to keep me going. And so I kept going, and I kept reading, and I got to that last word, and I said it out loud, dramatically, thinking it was going to be it. And I felt nothing, really nothing. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. I sat back. I was just sitting on the floor, and I went, wow, it's not true. And I was like, well, okay, what am I going to do now? And I was like, okay, I guess it's going to start with calling my parents and having a conversation and being like,
okay, you guys, I am hearing this story for the first time, so I am literally like not sure what's going to happen.
And I was like, I guess I'll go call mom and dad and tell them, I'm sorry. I'm out. And I think you guys have been duped. And I had this thought come to me, you're not done. And I was like, what? And I looked up, I pulled out my scriptures again, and I turned the page, and it was the pronunciation guide. And I was like, no, that was not part of the deal. I'm not reading the pronunciation guide. And I flipped back, and I looked at the bottom of the page of my copy. I know it's not in every copy, and it said the end. And I just said out loud the words, the end? Like, is that it? And look, take it or leave it, I had an experience when I uttered those two words that I can never deny, Ganel-Lyn, like ever, for as long as I live. I don't care what people say about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. I don't understand all of his history, but I can tell you this much. What I experienced that night, with God speaking to my soul through the Spirit in a way I can't even come close to articulating, to ask me to reprocess that as just some sort of like chemical experience in my brain or a figment of my imagination is like asking me tomorrow to reprocess my memory and convince me that this conversation we're having right now didn't happen, but it did, and we both know it's happening. So I would just encourage anyone who's ever had any doubt to put forth the effort and get your own. And once you get that witness from God, there will still be questions. There will still be things to be worked through. But man, it will be undeniable. And anyone who asks me to deny that or dismiss it as just something, I don't know, they obviously haven't had that kind of experience.
I'm so grateful you testified. Can I push and ask one more question?
Sure.
when you felt that, because I could feel like people feeling that experience with you. And if you were to articulate what that further witness was, is there a word that comes to mind that makes you feel like no one can take it from you? Like, how would you describe what you heard, what you felt, and why it was like it's an anchor and it's just as real as like you and I talking right now on camera?
Super hard to articulate, obviously, but the words that come to my mind are just peace. I was in so much turmoil and confusion, and I was just flooded.
I love that.
With peace and confidence, and I knew that God loved me, and I knew that the book was divine in its origin, and that God is in the details of the Joseph Smith story.
And that was it.
And that was it, man. That was it.
And
I knew nothing else about church doctrine, nothing about anything else at that point. But I knew that this church was divine at its origins. Again, doesn't mean that there aren't things to be asked and things to be worked through. But that is my testimony based on my experience, and no one can ever take that from me.
Thank you. I would have done the whole show to have you witness and share that, because I love that in the same way it feels like the whole country knew Samuel was going to be the prophet.
Right.
That wasn't the internet.
Right.
That wasn't Google. Right. That was the power of what the Spirit can do. And yet, how often do we go, oh, maybe that was just what we made up in our heads, or maybe we just had, we had low blood sugar, or whatever the things are that we try to explain it away. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for letting me share.
Oh, it was so grateful. I hope that in some way, today's conversation, whether you're in a Ruth and Naomi experience where you're in a lot of loss, you're Hannah and you're a mama who's either struggling to be a mama or let your kids go, or this experience that John just shared and the witness of Samuel knowing through God's Spirit that he was the prophet. We hope that you have felt the Spirit today. Our invitation, though, today is, have you witnessed God be that compensatory God in your life? Maybe they're like Ruth and Naomi, a time of great loss or struggle that you can reflect back on now because it's hindsight and you can see the compensatory blessings. I hope you'll share with us on social media, with your family, with your friends, because we need those anchors to remember and go back to when it feels hard and confusing. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week on Real Talk, Come Follow Me.
Do you like Real Talk, Come Follow Me?
Then like and subscribe.